This is Shan. I'm speaking now to Iris's second in command. Winry has some thoughts on who you might be, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this conversation. Yes, in case you're wondering, Winry survived, as we knew she would. Her calculations were perfect. The building cracked exactly where she said it would, and she and the gifted prisoners escaped without a scratch. We'd hoped we'd be able to capture Iris in the chaos, but she escaped. At least, she escaped that time. Not today, though. And that's how I know I'm talking to her second in command, the one who's assumed control of operations. I know that because I'm looking at Iris as I say these words. She's alive. Alive, but bloodied and bruised and tied to a chair. You know why that is. You know why I haven't stung her with my venom, or stepped aside and allowed Zachary to rip the heat from her flesh, as much as I might want to. You know why. We have Iris, and you have Wren. So now we're going to talk about a trade.
This is Spines.
Wren's going to be furious at us for making this trade. We've discussed these scenarios before. What to do if one of us is taken. All of us, Winry and Zachary and Wren and I, we've all nodded and agreed and said, yes, the world is more important, and we won't risk the mission to save just one of us. But I've smelled Wren's copper penny lies as she said that, as she looked at me. And I've always known I would never leave her behind. So, as angry as Wren will be, I'm choosing to make this trade. Because at this moment, it's my choice to make. I don't know for certain that she's still alive. I believe that I'll feel it if she ever dies, but I don't know for sure. I'm choosing to believe that she's still alive. And for Iris's sake, I better be right. I don't know that Wren's alive, and I don't know if she's alive where she's being held, or I would have taken her back already. But if she is alive, I do have a sense of how you're holding her, because I was there when she was taken. It came at a quiet moment. A moment none of us expected to become dangerous. We were conducting surveillance about a week after the fall of the Citadel. I suppose you must know now where this surveillance was, who it was on. It hardly matters now. Zachary and Winry had taken the first shift, and Wren and I were going to relieve them. We approached the car where they sat. All seemed well, and both of them just seemed tired and bored. Wren and I were in the middle of the street when it happened. I smelled something above us, something like melted glass and burning cloth. I looked up, and about 10 feet up in the air was this bubble. It looked like one of those bubbles that children make with those plastic wands and bottles of soap. Except this one smelled nothing like soap. It smelled wrong, and it stretched to nearly 3 yards across. It felt as though it watched us, like it was conscious. And then it descended, and before any of us could do anything, it took Wren. She flailed and kicked as the bubble rose off the ground and carried her away with it. I felt that buzz that sizzles through the air when she uses her gifts. The ones that slow time or separate matter or allow her to teleport. I felt her try all of them. I tried my own, a hasty mixture of chemicals and pheromones, ones that I thought might puncture the side of the bubble, weaken its structure. Zachary was there in moments, lashing out with his own gifts. Floating up into the air, trying to reduce gravity, trying to reach through the wall of the bubble. But nothing worked, and that thing holding Wren sped away over the rooftops. You took her away from me. I don't know what gifted person you bought or bribed or forced to help you, but I know it wasn't something the Splinter developed by itself. This was scavenged from somebody with real talent. I know you know all of this, but I do think it's important to provide some context. I want you to understand very clearly what you are dealing with and how little I am prepared to negotiate over this. 10 seconds after Wren disappeared into the sky, a bike courier pulled up next to us on the sidewalk. He probably has no idea how close he came to dying in several different supernatural ways, but we held back at the last moment. The courier gave Zachary an envelope, asked for a signature, and sped away. Zachary opened the envelope and found a voice recorder inside. On it was a single voice recording, not even a minute long. It was me. It said, "Send me and Winry to Vienna." And then it gave a date and a time 3 weeks in the past. Finally, it closed with, "Shan, you'll need to go to the Blue River Bar on Alterplatz. Knock on the door and ask for Ilsa. She'll explain the rest." By the way, second in command, I'm telling you these details because any meaningful intelligence you might have derived from them is long in the past. These places are now abandoned. The people in them already known to you or moved on. Don't waste your time looking for them. You'll know why soon enough. Or, if you're really clever, you've pieced it together already. Zachary looked like he wanted to kick something as soon as that message ended. He and I have been down this road before. Wren in trouble. Him able only to send me into battle instead of going himself. He has a need to be a hero and a protector, Zachary does. It's honorable, in an egotistical sort of way. And I can't fault him for wanting to save Wren. But we had no time for such things, and I told him as much. I reminded him that our plan must have worked if I'd been able to send this message. But of course, we could be sure of no such thing. Even Zachary, who can pluck things out of the future and the past, doesn't truly understand how time travel works. "Just get her back," he said, and then he made some motion with his hands, and Winry and I stood in the cold of the Vienna winter. Winry asked quick, nervous questions as we made our way to the Blue River Bar. It's how she copes with these things. "Who do you think this Ilsa person is?" she asked. "Info broker? Security contractor?" I told her I didn't know. We found the bar and moved through a crowd of drinking people toward a back room. I didn't know who Ilsa was, but I knew that the room hidden at the back of this building was a brothel. I could already hear the groans and grunts through the soundproofing that separated the two businesses. I could already smell the sweat and sex on the air. No one else in the bar would be able to, though. They'd hidden it well, whoever ran this secret place. Just in case, I got my spines ready, and then I knocked on the door. A little slot opened at eye level, and somebody spoke in German. I answered in the same language, the language of one of my tiles, that I was here to see Ilsa. The door opened, and a slender young woman led us down a hallway. This place, it wasn't your typical brothel. This bouncer, this slight young woman, instead of a large, beefy man, gave off the scent of a gifted. From what I heard later, she can crush granite between her fingertips. We saw others as we moved down the hallway, past the bar, through a series of rooms. The employees were men, women, as well as some like me who are neither or both. But each and every one of them was gifted. Some looked human at first glance. Others would never pass in the outside world. One woman floated, cross-legged in the air. One man had scales covering his head and torso. One person, a tall, genderless figure with a shaved head, moved by crawling, gecko-like across the wall. All, without exception, were beautiful. Some were beautiful in human ways, and some completely inhuman. And they were surrounded by men and women who watched them with awe, with lust, with hunger. I saw diamond tennis bracelets and designer gowns and $3,000 suits. I saw people who run the world, or think they do, groveling at the feet of a gifted man with extra sets of arms. In a room off the main bar, I saw a male client strapped to a chair, his chest hair being singed off by a gifted woman with fire-wreathed hands. At the end of the long hallway, past the flurry of the main rooms, the bouncer knocked on a wooden door. "These people are asking for you," she said. I heard a voice. "Thank you. Let them in." Ilsa sat at a desk, behind a computer and stacks of paper. She wore a cardigan and reading glasses, and her dark hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. The only odd thing about her appearance were the long silk gloves she wore up to the elbow. She eyed me across the desk. "Well, if you're here for a job, you're hired," she said. Then she turned to Winry, and her eyes narrowed a little. "I'm afraid we employ gifted courtesans exclusively," she said. "That's not why we're here," I said. "We're here about the Splinter." Her eyes widened. "Ah, you must be Shan. And you're the one they call Winry. If I'm not mistaken, you work with Zachary." Winry snorted. "Whatever, he works with us," she said. I asked Ilsa how she knew Zachary. She hesitated for a moment before answering, then folded her arms and leaned back in her chair. "He leaked a lot of information to us back when he was with the Splinter. Some of our best leads started with him." I asked Ilsa what she had that would be useful for making an enormous demand of the Splinter, the kind of demand that would be nearly impossible for them to consider. Ilsa watched me carefully for a moment. Then she stood. "This will only take a moment," she said. "I need to make sure you're telling the truth." She took off one of her gloves, and then she touched my hand. Her appearance didn't change. She was still a normal-looking woman in a ponytail. But the moment her skin touched mine, she seemed like the most erotic creature on this earth. I forgot about Wren entirely. It's a terrible thing to say. It's a terrible thing to remember. But in that moment, all I wanted was to carry Ilsa to a bed and never leave it. It was all I could do not to rip her clothes off and have her right there on the desk. She was asking me a question, but I was so distracted it took me a minute to hear it. Finally, I fought through that fog of lust and confusion enough to listen. "Do you work for the Splinter?" Ilsa asked again. "Are you here as a spy?" I told her no, and then I begged her for things I won't repeat now. Things I'm sure Wren would be unhappy about. I told her I would answer any question she asked. I would do anything if only she would let me. Well, I won't say the rest. Ilsa stepped back, and all that lust vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. So fast it made me lightheaded. I'm no stranger to altered body chemistry. I can secrete pheromones and make biological changes that increase people's sex drive, but I can't do anything approaching what Ilsa could do with one touch. She turned away from me and touched Winry's arm and asked her the same questions. Winry's eyes glazed over, her knees almost buckling. And like me, it took several tries before Ilsa got an answer. "Good," Ilsa said when she was done. Winry staggered, wide-eyed. "You're not spies," Ilsa said. "We can work together." She sat down at her desk, reached into the neck of her blouse, and pulled out a key on a chain. She used that key to open a drawer in her desk, and then she pulled out a leather-bound ledger. And then, with those silk-gloved hands, she flipped open the book, 2 pages of columns filled with names, addresses, notations. "Shan, Winry," Ilsa said, "I'd like to introduce you to some of my best clients." It makes perfect sense when you think about it. Of course, the same group of people who are fixated on superhuman abilities would include gifted fetishists among their number. I say that without judgment. There's nothing wrong with being attracted to one of my kind. But the people who visited this brothel, they treated it as a kind of menagerie. A place to sample curiosities. And visitors to a menagerie always see themselves as spectators. They never imagine that the curiosities might be watching them. Let this be a lesson to you. Don't underestimate the people who work in a brothel, especially not Ilsa's brothel. The ledger was full of information about prominent people from around the world. There were ambassadors and CEOs and heads of state. There were celebrities and warlords, bishops and Nobel laureates. Their habits, their preferences, secrets they had whispered in their sleep or screamed in ecstasy. There are things in that ledger that could bring down governments, start wars, end lives. But we weren't here for them. We were here for the Splinter leadership. You'll have figured out your traitor by now, but just in case, his name was Lars Halvorsen. A wealthy youngest son of some financier, a distant connection to the Swedish royal family. third cousin twice removed from one of the princesses, something like that. Enough status and prestige to never have to work or struggle, but not enough to ever have to worry about running the family business or holding a title. In other words, the perfect sort of person to become involved in obscure hobbies and secret societies. The perfect sort of person to become fixated on the stranger members of the human race. I suspect that Lars got into the Splinter on the basis of his money and his connections alone, not because of any skills or knowledge he might have possessed. But he must not be entirely useless, because he worked his way into Iris's inner circle, 4 or 5 places from her position at the top. He would never lead the Splinter, not with his lack of medical or scientific background, even before he became the traitor that may lead to your destruction. But he had Iris's ear, and that's what interested us. Lars made a habit of visiting Vienna once a month, ostensibly to attend board meetings for one of his charities. In reality, though, he suffered through those dull meetings every 4 weeks, just so he could slip away and visit his very favorite place on earth, the Blue River Bar. The ledger showed that he had sampled many of the employees, but he had eventually settled on a favorite, a woman named Vision. That wasn't her real name, just the one she used with the clients. The clients never expect to hear names like David, or Maria, or Ahmed. They want creatures who call themselves Vision, Nightwalker, Deathshroud. They want spandex-clad heroes and villains, archetypes, rather than people with history and family and politics. Lars never thought about the possibility that Vision might also be a mother and a sister and an anti-globalization activist. He never considered the possibility that she might know exactly the kind of questions to ask a man like Lars, a man of mediocre talents and superb connections. Vision joined us in Ilsa's office, and there we hatched a plan to take your leader. Vision's gift is immersive illusion. She can not only make clients see a fabricated scene, she can make them smell and taste and hear and feel it. The sexual possibilities of this gift should be obvious. She never touches clients. She merely takes them into a room, listens to their fantasies, and spins beautiful dreams of things that could never possibly happen in the real world, not even from another gifted. This is what Lars saw on his next visit to the Blue River Bar, 2 weeks after Winry and I arrived in what we considered the past. He went to the bar, he had his drinks, he eyed the men and women and genderless people who worked the floor. And then Vision sidled up to him, even more beautiful than usual, with her thick black hair and bee-stung lips. She ran a hand along his leg, and he was hers for the taking. They went to one of the rooms, had a glass of wine, and he told her about the scenario that had occupied his fantasies lately. What it was doesn't matter. What matters is that Vision held out her hands and conjured his fantasies, and he fell into them without hesitation. Afterwards, as he lay on the bed and tried to catch his breath, the illusion seemed to fade, and he found himself back in Vision's room, or something very close to it. Perhaps he would have noticed some details being slightly off, the colors and textures just a little different from before. But the wine and the sex had let him slip into a drowsy haze, and he was none the wiser. His cell phone rang. Perhaps he thought that was odd because he had been careful to set it to vibrate before. But it rang, and he groaned and reached for it and answered. And out of the phone barked the voice of Callum, Iris's right hand. Perhaps that's you, whoever I'm talking to. Maybe not. Callum's voice said, "Lars, do you know where Iris is?" Lars blinked and sat up. Callum was as rough and abrupt as Lars was refined. And he didn't have any respect for money or aristocracy. Lars always felt small in Callum's presence, and he couldn't quite summon the confidence he usually had. "No," Lars said, "I don't know where she is. What's wrong?" And Callum's gruff, rough voice answered, "What's wrong is we've got a major Mosaic asset loose in the Austrian wilderness, and I have to supervise Operation Extraction here. We need a senior officer on the ground to coordinate the teams. It's Zachary, Lars. That motherfucker's planning on wrecking the project. I can feel it." Lars's heart started pounding. This was his chance. This is where he could prove himself, take charge, let himself shine at long last. "I'm in Vienna," he said. "I can be there." Callum interrupted him. No, you stay put. You can be there, but Iris has to take charge. And you spend some time calling her for a change. I don't have time. I don't have time to brief her and deal with operations here all at once. I'm sending you the file on the asset and the teams I'm sending out. So you take charge of getting hold of Iris." Lars promised he would, and then he hung up the phone, giddy with possibilities. Perhaps he noticed a slight shift in the room at that moment. Maybe he noticed that the texture of the sheets got a little bit more authentic, that the colors dimmed. But if he noticed these things at all, he quickly forgot them as he opened the mission dossier that had been emailed to his phone, as he called up Iris and told her that he had located a major asset in Austria, that he had called the extraction teams, that he would coordinate operations until her arrival. He paused dramatically before telling her that it was Zachary, that they had him cornered. She said only that she was heading to the airport and that she would be there in 24 hours. That's always been Iris's weakness. Maybe you, second in command. Callum, perhaps? Maybe you've noticed this about her. Maybe not. She formed a far, far deeper attachment to Zachary than she would ever admit. Not affection. Not love. More like ownership. Any other asset, maybe she would have held back. Maybe she would have delegated. But not Zachary. Zachary, she wanted to capture personally. The ambush was easy. Lars did most of the work for us. We'd spent the last 2 weeks laying the groundwork for the rest. Calls to the supposed strike teams rerouted to Wren. A phone hack on Iris used to track her location. All of the things we needed to follow and grab her when the time was right. All the things needed to ensure that she would believe she was going in supported by 2 strike teams, when really she would be alone. It worked. Now we have her. And we've spent the last 2 weeks making sure that none of your usual methods will work. Wren anticipated all your moves. There is no point fighting us. Your only option is to trade. To be clear, I understand that the people I'm speaking to are willing to let Iris die for the cause. I know they've been instructed to do so. I know you won't save her out of any attachments or personal loyalty. but consider how many secrets she has. Consider the vast array of creative techniques I have at my disposal by which I could extract those secrets. Consider what she knows, and consider the pieces of knowledge that could destroy her plans. Consider what Zachary and I would love to do to her to get those secrets. Consider the state of mind I will be in if Wren isn't alive and unharmed, and consider what I am capable of doing to all of you. So if you want to avoid having each and every one of the Splinter's secrets pulled bloody from Iris's flesh, you have only one option. Bring Wren, alive and well, to the coordinates Winry has just texted you. Follow each and every one of these instructions to the letter. And if Wren has one scratch on her, please understand, I will burn your world to the ground.
Spines is a production of Zoom Doom Stories. It's narrated by Wren Jones, written by Jamie Killen, website and logos by Benjamin Pond, produced by Jamie Killen and Benjamin Pond. You can support Spines by visiting patreon.com/Spines Podcast and by subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. Spines is a member of Fate Crafters Studios. Find more great shows at fatecrafters.com. This week we recommend 2298. Years after an invasion nearly destroys Earth, a new society has coalesced around the only thing left, the internet. The network makes sure profiles eat right and stay focused, but number 24, thanks to the sudden appearance of a mysterious bird, is finding that difficult. Follow the feature on Twitter at 2298pod.